Hi, listeners. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. Today, I interviewed the New York General Counsel of the world's largest entertainment and bowling facilities. We discussed the fateful phone call from a well-known private equity firm looking for a special breed of in-house attorney to take this company emerging out of bankruptcy into a thriving state. There'll be a lot of takeaways, especially insights into the private equity world. Just a reminder, the PDF transcript of this audio is available to download. Go to liongroupreCruiting.com/podcast. As many of you know, we interview corporate defense, law firm leaders, partners, general counsels, and the legal consultants. You are listening to episode 24 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States. Enjoy a front row seat with law firm leaders, their partners, and legal consultants as we discuss life and leadership.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Rick Chung, General Counsel, SVP of Bowlmor AMF, the world's largest operator of bowling and entertainment facilities with over 320 locations and a workforce of 9,000 employees. And that includes the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Rick is a specialist in corporate growth strategy, especially around mergers and acquisitions and geographical vertical growth. He is also well-versed in legal infrastructure, technology, compliance and operations, procurement, HR, privacy, and security management. Prior to Bowlmor, Rick was GC and compliance officer secretary at Medivo and served as corporate counsel at Epic Systems. He began his legal career at Proskauer Rose and received his law degree from NYU School of Law. Welcome, Rick, to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Rick, there's just some incredible history you have with assisting corporations, and I'd really like to jump in the middle of it at this moment. Tell us a little bit about the phone call you got from the investor group, who they were, and what were they asking you to do?
Sure. Thank you very much for allowing me to spend some time with you and your audience. Very shortly, I received a call from Cerberus, who I'd worked with before. It was a private equity company. And they gave me a call and they said, Rick, we have this great iconic brand, and it fell on tough times coming out of bankruptcy, and we want you to really be a fresh voice, a new face that allows the company to grow. I had worked with Cerberus in the past and assisted them in terms of developing certain other growth strategies with other portfolio companies. And so I asked them, what is this company? And they said, it's Bowlmor AMF. And the first response that came out of my mouth was, you know, I'm not really a bowling attorney. and they said, you know what, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for your outlook. We're looking for your processes. We're looking for your strategies. We want to look for someone who can steer this ship in a different direction that we think can maximize the overall potential. And after meeting with the folks here in terms of the executive management, meeting with some folks over at Cerberus, I thought it was just a great opportunity to lend my skill and lend my efforts to really a company that had a great deal of potential.
With basically the turnaround or the bringing out of bankruptcy and making them profitable, I'd love for you to share with my audience, Rick, what have you learned from taking this company from bankruptcy to being thriving right now?
I think that there is a common thread throughout my legal career in that back in 97 through to 2007, it was growth during the dot-com and technology boom. And so it was taking these companies from the infant stages and developing the strategies and policies and business models and business plans that allowed them the roadmap to grow and holding their hands during the entire process. My outside counsel type roles as deputy corporate counsel and general counsel prior to me coming on board here, there also was that same common thread, which was these were companies that really did not have the infrastructure that in terms of foundational principles in order to grow. And it was to look in terms of that toolbox that I think all lawyers have and figuring out, geez, what is needed here? Is the Office of General Counsel needed to really support product dev? Is it to support biz dev? Is it to support acquisition and geographical growth? It's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution. And so when I came on board here, and I think it's important for any attorney to, when they come on board at a company, is to look at it from a fresh set of eyes and not pigeonhole the company in thinking that a certain or specific solution is got to work in this particular case. And certainly when I came on board here, I looked at it in terms of, let's go through the analysis first in terms of what is needed, and then address those needs in a specific manner that is palatable to the folks here. I think that kind of an open mind type of concept and a collaborative model worked ideally in this particular environment, and it also worked really well in my prior roles as well.
When you had these roles and when you talked about strategy, I mean, you're speaking almost as if like a CEO. Help me understand your involvement for corporate strategy with the CEO, with the C-suite.
I think the first thing that I typically do when I'm in a company or portfolio company as the head of legal in the Office of General Counsel is to speak to as many folks as possible, as many business unit leaders, as many executives as possible in terms of understanding what are their needs. And really ends up being a listening exercise for, let's say, the first year and a half. There's actually no specific time frame where you draw the line and say, I'm not going to listen anymore, of course. But during that initial few months, few weeks, few years, I think that my role has been to listen very acutely in terms of understanding what their specific needs are, and then offering suggestions in terms of, well, have you thought about this? Is this also a need? Before you try to pick up the toolbox and figuring out what the solution can be. So typically that has been the first strategy, and it is meeting certainly with the executive management team, each one of them in terms of their fields of expertise, but it also ends up meeting with the middle tier management as well, which I think is equally as important.
Absolutely. I'm assuming this is the first time you've taken a company from bankruptcy to a thriving place. Is that correct?
Outside of the law firm. Inside of the law firm during the debt.com boom, when the bubble burst around 2000, 2001, there were a lot of workouts. There were a lot of restructurings, both formal and informal, where we had to either pivot a business model or liquidate some assets or full-fledged restructuring. So within that law firm environment is where I really cut my teeth in terms of collaborating with the business unit leaders and the president and the CFO in terms of understanding what is their horizon approach in the near term, the 1-year plan, the 3-year plan, the 5-year plan, in order to really pick up this company by the bootstraps and launch it forward in terms of a different direction that's much more prosperous. Certainly after coming out of the law firm, Bowlmor AMF was my first company where I could reach back during my days at Proskauer and bring forward all these new strategies and new tools, as I like to call it, and then implement them in this particular type of bowling and leisure hospitality environment.
Absolutely. What were some of the problems you were solving in those first initial years working there?
I would say that for this particular company, the bankruptcy was not driven by debt or liabilities. My view, and I think it's proven true because of our level of success since I came on board during the last 5.5 years, was that the company needed an acceleration of innovation, of taking chances, of capitalizing and executing on opportunities, and understanding that in order to achieve success, there shouldn't be a fear of growth. And I think a lot of offices of general counsel look at the OGC in terms of a risk-averse type of mentality, risk mitigation. You identify the risk. What are you going to do about that risk? You're going to put a box around it, or you're going to insure against it, or you're going to mitigate it, right? Or you can look at it in terms of an opportunity for growth. Because if your competitors have that same risk, how you address that risk from an Office of General Counsel perspective creates that opportunity where you can really help propel the company going forward in terms of a growth strategy.
Yeah.
And so when I came on board here, it was identifying what those opportunities were and capitalizing on it. And that's probably the more tangible aspect. Okay. But there is an intangible aspect as well. And the intangible aspect is that every company, and we have 9,000 employees, operates on that personal appeal in addition to the tangible appeal. And what I mean by that is that the company is made up of individuals and it is made up of people. And my role when I came on board was, in essence, to win the hearts and minds of the people that I work with. And how did I get them to trust that the Office of General Counsel and the head of legal in my role was not going to be the impediment to their growth and success, but was going to be the accelerator? And how do you change a person's mindset in terms of accomplishing their growth strategy being aligned with ours? And that's tricky. It's an interesting skill to have, but it's also very exciting.
Well, and it sounds like a paradigm shift because of the traditional perception of the legal department. How did you become a catalyst or a department to help forward everyone else's goals?
The first step is listening. And I echo what I mentioned before, which is that the first few weeks, first few months, it's just a listening exercise. Then I will say that it needs to be entirely collaborative. And what I mean by that is when I was at the law firm, closing a deal, the attorney, whether you're an associate, mid-level associate, or the partner, the law firm was always seen as a quarterback for the deal to make sure that all different aspects of the transaction was taken care of. And at the same time, as quarterback, you listen. That's your role. You have to listen to everyone's needs and figure out where everyone's solution may reside. So I think that's just a really important step that really cannot be discounted.
Understood. So let's pivot to something I've been wanting to ask you. As a recruiter, and I don't talk about what I do a whole lot on my podcast, but I think it is important to know that I'm approached by attorneys, partners in big law firms, and many, many general counsel throughout the ranks in the United States. And they all ask me, how can we come in line with serving private equity groups? Because there's so much dry powder right now. So what advice would you give similar attorneys who want to assist investor groups with their objectives?
I think that the first thing is to understand that a private equity group is really a partner to a company in terms of their growth horizon. And you have to keep that communication line open with the managing director over at the private equity group and understand and try to understand ultimately what is their horizon. And then hopefully you create the milestones and business plan to achieve their ultimate goal and their ultimate horizon. And what I would also say is that those milestones need to be measurable. And there should be, in a marketing sense, there should be lift. And how you measure that lift can be both quantitative and can also be qualitative. But at the end of the day, if you provide full visibility to the private equity company, to the PE firm, that's what they're looking for. And if they see those measures of success being accomplished along the way within the time parameters that you say that will be accomplished, that really engenders a high level of trust in the beginning, where private equity folks will provide you much more leniency and much more leeway to be able to execute on your business plan. there is a lot of trust that needs to be created, and it can really only be created through a true level of visibility and transparency on what the company, the portfolio company, really is and where it wants to go.
Rick, thank you. And another question I would just ask, it's sort of tangent to it, but these general counsel and law partners ask, how do they get their foot in the door with private equity firms? What would you tell someone? Because there are not endless amounts of them out there, but there are a lot. What advice would you give someone who's highly skilled, but to pitch themselves, if you may, to a private equity firm? How would they go about doing that? Or how would you suggest them trying to see if they can be a value add, a valuable player to the PE team?
Sure. I think that there's two aspects in terms of representing probably three in terms of representing private equity folks. The first aspect is compliance in terms of managing their multitude of funds. Usually it's limited partnership or LP units that gets issued. The second aspect is raising capital. If you're a law firm, how do you assist the private equity company in terms of raising the capital, in terms of putting together the fund, soliciting the offers for the LP units? And then the last aspect is really representing the portfolio companies of the PE firms in terms of being a value-added resource. I think that in a law firm, you can pivot yourself in terms of maybe one or two or all three. But ultimately, I believe that law firms can try to find their sweet spot in one or two or three of those. Maybe it might be just one, and that's perfectly fine. But the temperature in terms of calibrating what the PE firms are looking for, I think really falls into those three buckets. The last bucket that I mentioned in terms of providing that value-added resource to the portfolio companies really ends up being working hand in hand with, I will say, the in-house group of the portfolio companies to ensure that the voice and the communication between the portfolio companies and the PE firms is well served. So that line of communication, in many times, the outside counsel, the outside law firm, can be a very nice conduit in terms of facilitating that. And a great example to this is to suggest strategic growth. And again, the perfect example, of course, is that when the law firm probably has multitude of clients that are in various stages of growth or stagnation that may or may not be looking for a partner to merge and have a joint venture with. Combining that opportunity with a portfolio company ultimately helps the private equity company because the accretive growth that the private equity company can accomplish through strategic acquisitions ultimately increases the overall value of the combined consolidated enterprise, which, of course, increases the ROI potential at the end stage of the exit.
It makes a lot of sense. Let's invert this a little bit, this question. What advice would you give investor groups or private equity groups looking to hire legal talent in this economy?
There's two ways of looking at legal talent or finding whether it's deputy general counsels or general counsels, head of legals, or chief compliance officers, which is, do you look for someone who fits the field of expertise of that portfolio company? And what I mean by that is if the portfolio company manufactures auto parts, do you look for a general counsel who has that auto parts or manufacturing experience? The other way to look at it is to look at it in terms of identifying the specific skills of the general counsel or the attorney that is transient, that can be transferred very easily. That's certainly what Cerberus looked at with me, because they looked at it in terms of, we're not looking for someone who's a bowling attorney. In fact, there's probably no person who specializes in bowling or family entertainment centers in this capacity. What they were looking for was certain skills, approach that transfers readily regardless of industry. And whether it's an outlook where to view the Office of General Counsel as truly a commercial type of department? Or is it their view that the Office of General Counsel should really be purely support in the background, not the forefront? So I think that, I know you could probably tell from my level of approach, I truly do believe that a private equity company is best served when they're looking for legal talent and looking at the skills, the experience that they feel can be easily transferred, regardless of industry, to their portfolio companies that they wish to staff.
Excellent. Let's jump to another question that you actually had brought up, and it's just in regards to private equity. So, in essence, because you've seen so much in private equity, what advice would you give folks in private equity? You talked about a true exit. You talked about kind of leadership structuring. Can you elaborate on that?
I think that you hit the nail on the head, which is leadership and structure. And from a private equity company, a managing director at a private equity firm that's looking or has just purchased a portfolio company or made a significant investment in a portfolio company, the ultimate question is what next? And I think that managing director has either made the evaluation that the existing executive management group, the human intellectual capital, the acumen, the tangible feel of these individuals, either can pivot and be a true value added and instrumental in the growth of the portfolio company, or that managing director feels that, we need more. We need to supplement it with more individuals. At the end of the day, I believe that the portfolio company, the true grounds for success is in the human element and to focus on those individuals. The product is great. It's not really going to be a mantra that can propel the growth of a company into the future. As great as Google's search engine optimization is, the executives in Google have propelled the growth into various operating systems, right, in terms of various advertising and marketing direction and various product offerings as well. That was pure ingenuity and growth developed by individuals, not because it had a great product and that was a search window engine. So the key, I think, and I believe for a private equity group is to first identify what the need is from a human perspective, human capital perspective in executive management, and then figuring out either we think it works or we think it doesn't work. And the quicker that the managing director within a private equity group figures out from a human capital perspective whether it works or it doesn't work, and then pivots if it doesn't work, and then pivots very quickly, I think that that's going to be a key component in terms of success.
So I want to jump to something that you've been quoted about quite a bit in your interviews and that I really appreciate. And from our initial phone call, made me really understand that this is a lot of value you bring to companies. So let's talk about the purpose of the Office of General Counsel and specifically your leadership style. What are companies seeing and why is this so important to you?
Yeah, this is kind of what holds dear to my heart in terms of trying to figure out if we're in an ideal Office of General Counsel, what is our direction? Or how do we sit within the company? And I think that OGCs in various companies, and certainly in my prior two roles in the Office of General Counsel, served different purposes. In my current role as Office of General Counsel, it was truly to be what I like to call a consigliere, not a lawyer. And what I mean by that is that everyone looks at lawyers as perhaps a stumbling block, right? I don't want to go to our attorney because he's just going to say no. Or I don't want to go to my attorney. I'm scared what he's going to say or she's going to say to me because I've done something wrong. The goal when I came on board here, and also in my prior two roles as well, was to tear down those walls. And how do I create truly a consigliere, a true counselor type of approach or perspective in the eyes of my personnel. And it can be very small. The example that I tell a lot of folks is we have 9,000 employees in our company. And the phone number to reach me, which all 9,000 employees have, is my cell phone number.
Wow.
And we operate on time zones from the East Coast to the West Coast. And in the West Coast, of course, they're 3 hours behind. And so if y'all ever been to a bowling alley, it really doesn't start hopping until 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m. Sometimes. In Los Angeles, 11:30 p.m. means 2:30 a.m. where I work in New York. So yes, I do get calls, but that's okay, because as a consigliere, I'd rather know than not know.
Yep.
And because I can help people when they tell me what their issues are. It's very difficult for me to guess on an hourly basis what's wrong or what I can try to help ameliorate or address. So I think that is really one of the key components of my approach in terms of running the Office of General Counsel and being the head of legal here, is how can I, and it's not a perfect science, I try to perfect the role of being a consigliere every day, and I don't espouse to having the perfect solution, but I always try. Every day I try perfecting that approach where others do not feel that they can't come to me. They feel that they want to come to me to figure out and address their concerns.
Rick, let me just quote you from our conversation. So you told me that you're not one to keep status quo, that you like to move companies forward. You shared this with me too. You mentioned that if you're not making a company money, fire you, and that you guys are a value add and not a cost center. Speak to those things.
I think that to look at a general counsel or the legal role, whether you're a deputy general counsel, a corporate counsel, associate counsel, and to look at your role within the company as not fluid, as not dynamic. Well, if you're not fluid and you're not dynamic, you're stagnant. And that's not good. And so I try to grow every day and learn more and more about my company. And in the process, it means understanding where I can provide input, advice as a counselor, as a consigliere, and lend my weight in my 21 years of experience in figuring out, okay, I'm going to reach into my toolbox, address this particular need in this particular department, and allow that department to grow. A perfect example is marketing. And the marketing aspect really in the last 21 years has taken a very, very transformative type of role, right? The typical type of advertising in a magazine or the newspaper was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, was just what was done, or a television ad. Now, the usage of big data, the usage of understanding that everything has to have a measurable ROI or metric where I can gauge the success of that marketing is important. So how does legal play in that role? Well, when drafting a particular agreement with a marketing player, one of the first things that I think legal counsel, what we put into our agreements is I want to know what the KPI is. I want to put in the key performing indicators into the agreement in order to measure up the performance of that marketing player with what my expectations are for ROI or lift, right? I want to be able to measure out the uniques. I want to be able to measure out the number of eyeballs that see that particular ad. And I want to be able to hold you accountable, marketing partner, to those measuring specifics. Because if it's in your marketing literature that you can draw that level of performance, I'm going to hold you accountable to it. And I think in a lot of times, and what I've seen is that legal departments look at an agreement not in terms of a value add on how I can improve performance, but in terms of how I can measure out mitigating the risk or the downside risk that the marketing sponsor doesn't mess up, right? And so you flip that paradigm around and you ensure that there is success or a measurable success where I can say, you know what, you guys are doing a great job. Let's realign our interests. And how do I realign those interests? Well, if my revenue hits a certain amount because of your interplay, your marketing efforts, I'm going to give you a bounty. I'm going to give you a bounty of X, where that now our interests are aligned. And so how do you mesh and how can you infuse all those points into one agreement in marketing is just a kind of a microcosm of how, for a particular deal, it fits within the macro aspect of the growth within a particular company.
That's excellent. That's a great example, Rick. I really appreciate you sharing how you use KPIs and performance indicators to drive and partner with other divisions in the company to accomplish those goals. If you wouldn't mind, I want to jump to your perspective on outside counsel. So you've been on the other side of the deal where you're serving corporations, companies, and then you're on the inside where you're deciding who to use and how to use them. So when you came to Bowlmor AMF, I believe you had as many as 40 or 50 outside counsel that you were working with?
Yeah, that's correct.
And I know that you reduced that, you consolidated. Can you just explain to my listeners your perspectives and expectations of outside counsel?
First, I think that the team includes outside counsel. I've never considered our outside counsel as an outside player within our organization. In fact, they're an inside player within our organization. I want them to learn more. And the more I can see that there's a reciprocal relationship where, sure, I'm providing their business in terms of representation that they can offer up, but at the same time, they're hungry for more in terms of understanding more aspects of our business. The more they understand about our business, the more they're going to be a better counsel. The perfect example of this is we all know what a bowling alley is, but not everyone knows how a bowling alley operates. And it's a very unique environment, and there's a lot of nomenclature in terms of that we use. We have, certainly, there is the typical bartender. There's a typical server. We have a food and beverage supervisor. We have, which is very specific to our industry, that person who sprays the shoes, the shoe clerk, right? And so there is a lot of verbiage that in semantics that is very specific to our industry. The more I see our outside counsel wanting to learn about that same type of manner of speak, the more they're going to be able to function in the courtroom or in drafting an agreement in a much better scale. So when you're absolutely right, Chris, when I came on board, it was 40 or 50 counsels. And what I found is that, and what I wanted to create was a greater degree of accountability. And the more I should be rewarding individuals or law firms with more business who do better.
Yep.
And so that greater level of accountability is first and foremost an incentive, right, in terms of their performance, but it also allows for a greater level of continuity of knowledge where it's centralized. And the more they know, the more better they're going to perform. The other aspect of this, I'll give you a funny anecdote. And I decided that I wanted to meet with as many of those 40 or 50 law firms as possible when my first probably 6 months here. And as I was having lunch with one of the law firm partners, he asked me what was important to me in terms of selection of outside counsel. And I said, well, a lot of the things which I discussed previously just now, but also I said if I was going to boil it down to something, I need to feel that my outside counsel is a value add. So how can that outside counsel or players within that law firm truly be a value add in terms of understanding my business and accelerating the growth of my business? And the head attorney said to me, well, I definitely think I'm a value add, and I'll tell you why, Rick, because I really like bowling. And I thought, so you believe that you're a value add because you actually like bowling, and that's the reason why. And so needless to say, that law firm is not one of our law firms. They're currently providing legal counsel to us. It really has to do with more than that. It doesn't have to do with liking our business. It has to do with how you can help our business.
Yeah.
And that is just truly an important function that I think that outside counsel should never lose sight of. And I've been on the opposite side because I've been at the law firm for 10 and a half years. When I represented my clients, that's what I tried to provide as much as possible, that level of verve, excitement, passion, interest, empathy, and truly, as an outside counsel, being that consigliere where I relay that, hey, client, your upside is my upside. And I'm going to try as much as possible to ensure that your growth accelerates because I know in the end I'm going to benefit. So if I see that level of empathy and alignment of interests, it's really exciting for me.
That's awesome. And I appreciate you sharing that. So let's pivot a little bit into some more personal subjects. I want to bring up the notion that, so you got a degree of economics in your undergrad and you studied coding. Tell me about how this is maybe applied to your business life and as an attorney. Sure. Do you look at things differently because of this?
Yeah, I think I do. The coding aspect was really prior, well, it was during college, but also prior to college. Coding is very process-oriented. Mm-hmm. And what I like to call it is a very linear thought pattern, whereas if you code a strand, it ultimately marries with another strand of code, and it all has to work together in order to create a feature or function that's executable. That's how when you press a button that says, a print button, that's in the background, all the what is called the binaries really line up in order to execute that function that allows you to print. It's relaying that message. And it's process-oriented. It's very linear thought. So I looked at the law in the same fashion, which is the more processes that I can create in terms of transparency to my paralegal, my associate counsel, my deputy general counsel, the more they're going to be able to function in a very predictable way where they have confidence that if they follow that process, they're going to achieve some level of success. In the coding world, it's the output. Well, in the legal world, it's that success. If I follow these processes that the Office of General Counsel has laid down for me, we know that we're going to get there. And we know that we're going to be able to develop the essential evidentiary support, if you want to look at it from a litigation perspective, that allows us to best position our case towards whether success. Now, whether that success is a settlement that is really great, or it's going to be, no, we're going to go full tilt, and we're going to litigate this because, quite frankly, it creates a precedent that we are strong players, that we're not going to be pushed around. So that process-driven type of mentality and approach is something that I think that has been borrowed from my days of coding. Economics really has to do, I think, with what I call a level of empirical, substantive way of looking at the law. And what I mean by that is that economics certainly is formula-driven and numbers-driven, but it also is dispositive, right? Because if you cross two lines together in terms of supply and demand, there is an equilibrium where you know where the price and the amount of goods bought and sold will be. So there is your process, there is the empirical testing, there is the actual result where it is palatable in a theoretical perspective. What I've tried to do is approach it in very much the similar way, which is how can I provide the most palatable way in terms of demonstrating of proof where it is accepted, whether by my stakeholders or the court or the person that I'm negotiating against. And so, number one, it has to, it really does have to be understanding your audience, because the same position that you want to develop and reinforce doesn't necessarily work in the court as it is when you're before the court, as it does when you before a person that you're negotiating against. It's a very different type of aspect. But ultimately, being a good litigator makes me a better transactional attorney. Better transactional attorney makes me a better litigator, and both of them makes me a better consigliere to my stakeholders within my organization.
Appreciate that, Rick, and I appreciate your insights into what you've learned and how you apply that. I wanted to ask you this question. I ask everyone this question when I speak with them, because I think reading is a critical component of attorneys' lives these days. But I just wanted to ask, what are you currently reading today, or what do you read on a daily basis that you enjoy?
I'm a news junkie. And so when people still read newspapers, I read a lot of newspapers in my daily life. Now I read more online as much as possible. And I think that understanding where the temperature and trends are in the world, or on a national scale, or even on a local scale, is important in terms of where, from a professional perspective, the Office of General Counsel needs to fit in, and from a much more organizational perspective, where the company needs to fit in.
What papers would you consider your favorite, or your kind of go-to?
Well, I think that I read a lot of the New York Times. Okay. I try to read, believe it or not, I even try to read People magazine.
Okay.
And the reason why is this. A lot of our play is leisure. And a lot of our play is families and millennials. And the more that I can understand what the trends are, the more important it is going to be for me to better position the company. A great example is this. We have openings. We have grand openings at a lot of our bowling centers. And the draw during that grand opening is very important. We invite media. We have VIPs come. There is that customary photo op opportunity in front of our backdrop. And all of that is important to us. Sometimes we have celebrities. We've had Paris Hilton. We've had Mark Teixeira. And we also, of course, as part of a family entertainment facility, we have music. And so way back when, a few years ago, one of the things that we had in terms of music, we would have a DJ. And we would try to retain a guest DJ, which is very important. Had I not read up about electronic dance music or the latest DJs that are out there, I wouldn't have really truly understood the importance of having a 1.5 or 2 hour trial run with a DJ so that we understand what their playlist would be that fit our environment. I think that that's really important, because not all EDM music is the same. So we really had to cobble together. So we had to bake. I made sure when we baked into the contract that we said, okay, we wanted to listen to what your playlist is going to look like beforehand, before you start playing. And so we arranged for that as a sample. And so sure enough, we said, okay, this works, this doesn't work, this fits within our theme, this doesn't fit within the theme. And so all of that really, I would like to say, was partly because of understanding the recent trends in terms of not just, always economic news or marketplace news, but entertainment news as well, which is equally important.
You had mentioned to me that you're a family man, and that I believe you mentioned you were married and you have kids. Tell me a little bit about how you guys do spend your leisure time when you have spare time.
I'm very fortunate that, I have a wonderful supporting wife and a 5.5, close to 6 now, year-old son who's going into kindergarten. And my son gets to get a kick out of telling his friends that his dad works inside a bowling alley. And they're saying, what does he actually do? We don't understand. And so I tell him, well, Dad polishes the balls, we sets the pins, make sure that the French fries are crispy. And so that's what he tells. That's what he tells his friends. And so, of course, they get a kick out of it. They're saying, oh, my dad's just a doctor. Your dad does some really cool stuff. And so it really is, I think, a great environment. And again, I am very fortunate where I have a very supportive wife that understands that I do travel because we have 320 centers that I have to travel to because of, you name it, right? I had to go up in Chicopee, Massachusetts one year because the toilet flooded. and it caused these issues around in the surrounding, and we cleaned it up, of course, but it caused all these issues. And I literally had to go up there. And so she was supportive enough to buy me these galoshes to ensure that I was well protected. So I think every person has to have that supportive family life in order to, I think every lawyer does, to really empathize and commiserate and being a sounding board. I happen to have that at home through my immediate family and also my extended family.
That's excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing about your personal life. It's an important part of our podcast. So bringing this to a close and conclusion, I just want to ask you one last question, Rick.
Sure.
What is something you have learned this year that has impacted you and how you live personally or professionally? Anything from a book or something that's come up?
As we grow up, I think that we have several mentors in our life. And along the way, our mentors say different words of advice. And, your mentor could be your professor. Your mentor could be a loved one. It could be a partner at your old law firm. My mentor and my person that has provided me the best Yoda, if you want to call it, type of legal advice is actually my mother.
Oh,
and, she's 78 years old. And through my entire legal career, she's just thrown out certain sayings and things that I've kind of captured in my mind, but has not really resonated in terms of its significance usually until several years later. And one of the things that she said, which has just recently resurfaced in terms of resonating, was enjoy the journey. And what I took from that, and by the way, she said that when I was a first or second year associate at Proskauer, just working at one point 41 days in a row.
Yeah, wow.
And I think I said to her, Mom, I don't know if I can do this. This is 20 years ago. And she said to me, Rick, enjoy the journey. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that meant. And so until now, where it's really resurfaced and really resonated. And I know now, and I think I know now, I haven't spoken to her again about it, was we get bombarded on a daily basis with all these challenges, with all these experiences and all these events. And as a legal professional, we were trying to manage all these aspects. And if we just take a step back and take it from a very holistic perspective, I think we all understand, and I hope we all understand, at least my approach is, that every one of these events, every one of these experiences, every one of these conflicts that we resolve, concerns that we address, is a journey. And in and of itself, it is the goal. They provide that tapestry of experiences that really make us a better legal professional. And sure, we have certain goals. There's a certain finish line along the way. But the journey itself is equally as enjoyable as the ultimate goal if we achieve it. And so I've tried to measure a level of success more routinely by the day-to-day type of events and experiences that I accumulate along the way in my journey. And so I tried to really pass that mantra along to young legal professionals as much as possible, because I think that folks can be mired in striving for a goal that's 10 years away without focusing on the present, which is equally as attainable and is equally as rewarding.
So important, and it's such sage wisdom. And it's interesting because it's so hard for people at certain points in our journey or our life to not understand what it means. But in hindsight, you really do see the value of it. Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate you sharing that piece from your mom. And again, I just want to say thank you. It's been an honor and pleasure to have you on the show.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. It was really worthwhile, and I hope to do it again.
Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you have questions or would like to recommend someone to be on the podcast, please email them to podcast@findthelions.com. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes. Also, please share our podcast with others via email or social media. To share our podcast, listen to more shows, or read the transcription of this audio, go to liongrouprerecruiting.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.